Here's a guy who thinks evolution is stupid.
Evolution is kind of stupid. Regardless of anything that I'm about to say, it is important to note that the whole theory of evolution is everything that is made up by someone.
I suppose in a sense it's made up, but it's made up for the purpose of explaining and predicting observation. Darwin saw that organisms seemed to have features that enabled them to be better able to survive in their different ecosystems, and came up with the educated guess that they change over time and that those changes were filtered by natural selection. So many scientists believe in it because it is very effective at doing that. We can use it to effectively predict what features certain fossils will have even before they are discovered, like was the case with the Tiktaalik. We can use it to predict genetic discoveries before those discoveries were made, like that chromosome 2 in humans is a fusion of two chromosomes.
Obviously, it's made up with some sort of relevancy to what happened, or what is theorized to have happened. But it is important to note that many of those things are probably incorrect and very, very stupid.
How do you figure? How exactly do you calculate this probability? Given how many different lines of investigation and experimentation have corroborated the theory, it seems like it very probably happened.
It doesn't actually make a lot of sense if you think about it clearly. One of the biggest things that the whole theory is kind of stupid is the fact that the theory says that we evolved from fish, that the earth was mostly covered in water.
The earth is still mostly covered in water.
And all of the species on earth was purely fish.
No, not all of the species on Earth were fish. No evolutionary biologist has ever claimed that. This guy reminds me of Jesusophile. He was a guy who pretended to be a creationist and made videos satirizing creationism. This is a great example of Poe's law. No matter how much someone promoting creationism seems too absurd to be sincere, there is always someone who actually believes what they're saying, so you can never be sure.
So I just want to clarify that also in the evolutionary theory it states that no animal can evolve in his own lifetime.
Well, in a sense it can. It can develop mutations in its germline that get passed on to its offspring.
So it is difficult to understand how they thought that all of the fish turned into land animals or amphibians. Because if you technically think about how the evolutionary theory works and how they describe how things evolve, then it is technically impossible for them to have reached land, for any of the fish inside of the water to reach the land. Because for that to happen, in the same statement as how the evolutionary theory describes how a species evolves, it means that the fish had to train himself every single day to go outside of the water and then get back inside.
Not true. There are lots of ways fish end up on land accidentally and get back into the water accidentally. They get washed up by the tides, they get beached by the waves, etc. Mudskippers, for example, get washed up by the tides and get washed back into the water again. Because of this, they have evolved the ability to breathe both in the water through their gills and on land through their skin. They didn't do this by training, they did this through mutating, as all organisms do, and the mutations get passed on to their offspring. And the mutations that grant survival and reproduction advantages are most likely to become common among the whole population over several generations.
Because he still has gills, he doesn't have lungs, he's only able to breathe inside of water.
Mudskippers only have gills, but are able to breathe outside of water because of some mutations that allowed for cutaneous respiration.
And not able to breathe air, it means that he had to already have that capability of going outside of the water and getting back inside and training himself every single day.
No, the tides could wash him in and out of the water and he wouldn't have to train. He just had to be lucky enough to inherit a mutation that allows for cutaneous respiration that his ancestors didn't have.
And not only that, but also in his lifetime he wouldn't have achieved anything. It means that he had to tell his children that they also had to go outside and train to go outside of the water and back into the water every single day.
That's not how mutations work. There was a guy named Jean-Baptiste Lamarck who believed that hereditary changes could be acquired non-genetically, but there's no evidence that this happens.
And if you think about it, it doesn't sound completely right, but just remember that this isn't something many people have thought about. It's just something that towards the curriculum is correct.
No, it isn't. The reason not a lot of people have thought about it is because what you're proposing is clearly absurd.
And I just think many of the things are stupid. I'm not going to tell you all the things or reasons why I think that my reasoning is better. I'm just going to tell you all the things that I know is kind of a blurry space.
They're a blurry space for you because you clearly haven't bothered to look up how new characteristics are acquired according to evolution. You could just ask someone who knows about this kind of thing instead of just assuming that the absurd scenario you thought up was what evolution actually says.
Also, I just want to state that the evolutionary theory, no one actually has an answer about how everything started in the beginning.
The theory of evolution doesn't try to say how life started in the beginning. It was a very successful attempt to explain the diversity of life, not the origin of life. We don't know all of the details of how the first self-replicating nucleotide chains developed, but given that they are chemicals, it doesn't seem so outlandish to infer that it happened chemically.
It just says that it just miraculously started, and then so on and so on.
If by it you mean the theory of evolution, it doesn't say anything about how life started. Folks who study how life started certainly don't say that it happened miraculously. Given that life is made of nothing but chemicals, I don't see why its inception would require anything other than chemical reactions.
But still, I just want to state that the fish had to train themselves every single day because they can't evolve in their own lifetime.
If they can't evolve in their own lifetime, how would training every single day cause them to evolve? The effects of training would only manifest in one's own lifetime. Lifting weights doesn't give your kids bigger muscles. Practicing guitar every day won't make your kids play like Van Halen.
And they had to tell the children, and only after a lot of generations, many hundreds of generations had to pass, that everyone had to train like that for them to adapt and be able to evolve to get lungs, to be able to breathe the air.
No, you don't have to get lungs to breathe. Lungs are not the only respiratory organs. Most bugs don't have lungs, but they can still get oxygen from the air.
And still, with many of the links and many of the things that have been evolving, there isn't any links in between.
Yeah, there are. For example, the fossil and genetic evidence shows that cetaceans evolved from land animals that sort of looked like dogs called the Pakicetus. Since the Pakicetus had nostrils at the end of its snout and cetaceans have blowholes in the tops of their heads, you would expect there to be species in between that would have their nostrils moving from the front of the snout to the top of the head over several generations, and we see several fossils that show this happening.
The easiest example is to say that we come from apes.
Well, by the taxonomical definition of ape, we still are apes. Apes are mammals with brachiating shoulder joints. Since humans lactate and can rotate their shoulder joints 360 degrees, we meet the necessary conditions for being apes.
And we evolved from apes into humans, from fish into apes into humans, and there isn't any links or any type of skeletons that shows any type of evidence to show any of this.
It's easy to think this if you never look into it and you don't know what an ape is.
I'm just saying that a lot of these things are kind of blurry, and it's kind of stupid if you think about it clearly. And like I said about the fish, it's unpractical, and that theory of how they were able to evolve is based on their own theory that said it happened.
No, the theory is not based on the theory. It's based on the fact that you can see fossils get more and more fish-like the deeper you go into the fossil record. It's also based on the fact that the proportion of genes that we share with other apes is very high, and the genes we share with other mammals is lower, and the genes we share with fish is lower still, but we still share some, which corroborates the idea that we descended from them.
Because in the evolutionary theory, it says that no animal can evolve inside their own lifetime. But they are the ones who said that we evolved from fish.
Yeah, over millions of generations. Evolution occurs generation to generation, not within the lifetime of any single organism.
So it kind of doesn't make sense how it's like this double-edged sword. And there are many statements and facts and interesting things that just doesn't come together in their own theory. And I'm not going to tell you now about all the things that I believe that happened and how I think everything came into fruition and all that things. I'm just going to explain for now how I think there is mistakes and how I think things get misinterpreted.
How about you ask someone who studies these things to explain them to you? You seem not to understand even the basics.
Also, the biggest thing is numbers. Just remember that we are the ones who created numbers. We said, okay, we come from 1 up until 10, and this is how the numbers look and everything like that.
It's refreshing to see a creationist who acknowledges that numbers do not exist as some kind of spooky, woo-woo platonic forms and are in fact invented. But I suspect maybe this guy is confusing numbers per se with numerals that represent numbers.
We decided to make numbers for mathematical equations and so on. So I also do believe that many of the things that are calculated about how long ago it was is definitely wrong.
Given that we invented numbers for the purpose of describing reality, it would be weird that they ended up not accurately describing reality.
And there is a study about this, they had a dinosaur fossil which one arm was a few million years older than the other arm.
Sounds like the two arms came from two different animals. Fossils from different organisms getting mixed together and being confused for being parts of the same animal does occasionally happen.
And it's just in speculation, because if for us to use math to be able to determine how old the thing is very, very unpractical and in a way very stupid.
How is it stupid to use math to calculate things? What would you suggest we use instead?
Because there is no way for us as a single person who is barely able to live up until 100 years to be able to determine how old something is that is more than 1,000 years old.
We can use dendrochronology to calculate the age of trees that are more than 1,000 years old. Since trees grow differently in the winter than in the summer, we can see the winter and summer cycles in the wood. To say that we can't be sure that this method works for trees that are older than any person alive today, we would have to assume that trees grew differently before any of us were born. And why would that be the case? With respect to fossils, since a lot of their ages are calculated using radiometric dating, we would have to assume that rates of radioactive decay were different before any of us were born. Why would that be the case?
Because we, as people, have never seen anything in our lifetime grow from the beginning up until the end for 1,000 years. For us to be able to calculate how old something is and just use a mathematical equation to see and say, okay, this thing is approximately 4 million years old is very, very stupid and very unpractical.
To say that our dating methods are unreliable would require us to assume that the rates of change we currently see as occurring consistently were not consistent in the past. This assumption would be baseless.
And it's definitely mostly wrong.
What evidence could there possibly be for that?
And I'll get into that in another video, but this is my statements that I have. I just want to say that the people who decided to make that mathematical equation about how deep the fossil lays determines how old it is.
That's not the equation that's used. You can't tell how old a layer is by how deep it is. You can only know that the deeper layers are older than the shallower ones because it wouldn't make any sense for younger layers to somehow develop beneath older ones. Very old layers can be very shallow due to erosion, so you can't know exactly how old it is that way. You can only know that the layers underneath it are older.
They could have used any numbers. They could have used half of the numbers. They could have used 1/10 of the numbers. They could have used any numbers. They decided what the numbers are going to be.
No, they observed that some elements decay into other elements at a constant rate. Then they looked at the ratio of the decaying elements to the products of decay in each layer, which shows us how long they have been there. Maybe you mean that they could have defined the units differently, but using different units wouldn't produce different ages.
So there isn't any way for us to definitely know that that is a true statement. Because as I said, it's unpractical for them to be able to calculate such a thing.
If it were unpractical, why is it so consistent? Why do several different methods of dating give the same results? If the numbers assigned to do the calculations were arbitrarily chosen, one would expect the results to be all over the place.
Because they are the ones who made the equation, and they are the ones who could have changed it any way they can.
Do you think when they made the equation, they didn't base it on anything? The equations are based on observations and measurements. They're not just made up out of whole cloth with no basis in anything at all.
And they don't actually have any type of evidence that says, for example, there is a rock or a type of structure that has been there for a million years, and it is written on the structure that this is made in this year and this will be whatever and whatever, because we only started counting the days 2,000 years ago.
Do you think that there were no calendar systems prior to the ones we use now? And if we did see rocks with dates written on them, that would be a more reliable indication of their age than measuring how much radioactive decaying they have done?
Then we started to actually count everything.
No, that's not when we started counting everything. The calendar we use now didn't even start 2,000 years ago. Nobody was using it until about 1,500 years ago. There are plenty of systems that counted the years long before Jesus was ever born. Before Jesus was ever born, the Romans were counting the years by how long it has been since Rome's founding.
So there isn't any way for them to know how something would look that is a certain age. They just decided the numbers and then they calculated it towards their own calculation that didn't even work in most cases, because some type of the bones weren't the same age. Because if the fossil was laying vertically, then the top and the end would have been different numbers, because that's how the scaling works and how the mathematical equation determines how old the fossil is.
It's getting harder and harder to believe that this guy is not a troll.
And it's just very stupid. Regardless, I would like to hear if you'd like to know more. I have a lot of these answers. I have a lot of things that I would like to share. I have a lot of things that would be of interest if you already like this. And yeah, let me know.
Where did you get these answers exactly? You accuse scientists of just making up numbers, but everything you've said sounds like you just made it up. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.